King James woman. I mean, they were super bad.
So then Joe Tex makes this incredible record called You Keep Her.
James, I got your letter.
What really happened to Joe Tex, the famous soul singer who died 43 years ago? People loved his music, but his death left many questions. Were the rumors about his life and passing true? Now, after so many years, his family has spoken out. What secrets have they revealed? Could this change how we remember him? Let's look at the truth behind these shocking rumors. Joe Tex was born Joseph Arrington Jr. in Rogers, Texas, to Joseph and Cherie Sue Arrington. He grew up with his sister, Mary Sue, raised by their grandmother, Mary Richardson, after their parents' divorce. His mother moved to Baytown, but Joe's early life was shaped by his love for music. He played the baritone saxophone in his high school band and sang in the local church choir. He entered talent shows and won a big prize in Houston, which included $300 and a trip to New York City. Joe Tex became known in New York for his performances at the Apollo Theater's Amateur Night. He won first place 4 times, which caught the attention of Henry Glover, who offered him a record deal with King Records. However, Joe's mom wanted him to finish high school first. Glover agreed to wait a year, and when Joe was 19, he signed the deal. In 1958, Joe Tex signed with a new label, Ace Records. He still didn't have big hits, but he started gaining a reputation for his stage presence. He opened for famous artists like Jackie Wilson, James Brown, and Little Richard. Joe Tex became known for his microphone tricks and dance moves, which would later define his career. Some people, including Little Richard, believed that James Brown copied Joe's moves. By 1960, Joe Tex left Ace and recorded for Anna Records in Detroit. He had a hit with his cover of Etta James's song, All I Could Do Was Cry. Around this time, Joe started using rapping in his songs, a style that would become popular in his later work. Tex was an artist who started his career in the 1960s, and like many musicians, his journey to success wasn't easy. In 1961, he recorded a song called Baby You're Right for a singer named Anna.
And if I can't have you, shucks, it's gonna drive me mad.
Later that year, James Brown made his own version of the song, but with different lyrics and music. James Brown's version became very popular, reaching number 2 on the R&B chart. Even though it was his song, Tex didn't get credit as the songwriter. Despite this setback, Tex continued his work in the music industry. Around this time, he began working with a man named Buddy Killen, who had his own label called Dial Records. However, things weren't going well for Tex. He had recorded many songs, but none of them became hits. By 1964, after many songs didn't chart, Buddy Killen decided to partner with Atlantic Records to distribute Tex's music. That same year, Tex had already recorded 30 songs, but none had made a real impact. It was tough, but Tex was about to get his big break. In November 1964, Tex recorded a song called Hold What You've Got at FAME Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. At first, Tex didn't believe in the song's potential and even told Buddy Killen not to release it. But Killen had a different opinion and decided to release the song in early 1965. To Tex's surprise, the song became a huge hit. It sold 200,000 copies before Tex even knew it was out, and by the time he found out, it was already climbing the charts.
Hold on to what you got.
Hold What You've Got became Tex's first big success, peaking at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the R&B charts. It stayed on the charts for 11 weeks and sold over 1 million copies. This song changed everything for Tex, and he went on to have an amazing year. Tex had 6 songs on the top 40 of the R&B charts. He had 2 number 1 hits that year, I Want to Do Everything for You, and A Sweet Woman Like You.
I know a lot of men wish they had
He also released 2 albums, Hold On to What You've Got and The New Boss, which were very successful. In fact, Tex had more R&B hits than even his famous rival James Brown. Tex continued his success into 1966 with songs like The Love You Save and SYSLJFM, the Letter Song. Tex's hit Show Me became popular with British rock bands and even country and pop artists. That same year, he released Skinny Legs and All, which became his second million-selling hit. This song stayed on the charts for 15 weeks and earned a gold disc from the Recording Industry Association of America. After leaving Atlantic, Tex joined Mercury Records and still kept the hits coming with songs like Buying a Book and Give the Baby Anything the Baby Wants. Tex's music style was different and catchy, with some of his music influencing future artists like Funkadelic. Tex and James Brown had a serious feud that lasted for many years, starting in the mid-1950s. Both artists were signed to King Records, a famous record label at the time. The trouble began when James Brown called out Tex during a dance at a local juke joint, challenging him to a battle. This was the beginning of a long and bitter rivalry between the two. In 1960, Tex left King Records and started recording for a smaller label called Anna Records in Detroit. He recorded a song called Baby You're Right, but a year later, James Brown recorded the same song, changing the lyrics and the music. Brown even gave himself co-writing credits, claiming that he helped write the song along with Tex.
If you think I love you, well, baby, you're...
Around the same time, Brown became involved with B. Ford, who had been married to Tex but divorced him in 1959. In 1960, James Brown and B. Ford recorded a song called You've Got the Power. Afterward, Tex received a letter from James Brown telling him that he was done with B. Ford, and if Tex wanted her back, he could have her. Tex was angry and responded by recording a diss track called You Keep Her in 1962, aimed directly at Brown.
Because now she belongs to you.
Their feud reached a dangerous point when Tex and Brown were both performing in Macon, Georgia. Tex opened the show, but during his performance, he mocked Brown by wearing a torn cape and rolling on the floor shouting, "Please, somebody help get me out of this cape." Brown, already upset about the song You Keep Her, didn't take kindly to Tex's actions. He left the club but soon returned with guns. A shooting broke out and several people were injured. Tex, however, had already left the scene. Johnny Jenkins, another performer, said that 7 people were shot. After the shooting, a man came and gave each injured person $100 to keep quiet and not speak to the press. Brown was never charged for the incident. Tex later accused Brown of stealing his dance moves and the way he used a microphone stand during performances. In the 1960s, Tex gave interviews where he disagreed with the idea that James Brown was the soul brother No. 1 Inch. Tex claimed that the title actually belonged to Little Willie John, not Brown. Tex even believed that Brown stopped some radio DJs from playing his popular song Skinny Legs and All, which he thought could have helped him take the top spot on the charts, pushing one of Brown's #1 songs down.
Take you, baby, skinny legs and all.
During a 1968 tour, Tex even put the words, "The New Soul Brother #1" on his tour bus, challenging James Brown for the title. However, Tex later took the words off and had the bus repainted. Tex wanted to prove who the true soul brother was, but Brown reportedly refused the challenge. When asked about it, Brown jokingly said, "I will not fight a black man. You need too much help." Even after Tex moved on from his feud with Brown, Brown made sure to take a shot at Tex. In his song Funky Side of Town from the Get on the Good Foot album, Brown reportedly joked by saying, "Who?" when Tex's name was mentioned. The feud between these two soul legends was a huge part of music history, and it showed just how competitive the world of soul music could be.
Joe Tex! Who? Joe Tex! Who's the name?
Joe had a bumpy ride in his early music career. Money was tight and he made some tough choices. One big claim he often made was that he sold the rights to the famous song Fever for just $300 because he needed cash.
Give me fever when you kiss me.
He said he had written the words and based it on the style of Tennessee Ernie Ford's hit 16 Tons. However, Otis Blackwell, who's credited with the song, always denied Joe's story. To vent his frustration, Joe wrote a song called Pneumonia, which had a similar sound to Fever. The song had dark humor with lines like, "If you put your cotton-picking hands around me, I'm gonna hit you with this rocking chair." Many people believe this was Joe's way of taking a shot at Blackwell or Little Willie John, who made Fever famous. Joe's unique style often got him in trouble. He loved blending different types of music, but record labels and producers wanted him to stick to more traditional songs. Despite this, he created some interesting tracks during his time with King Records. Songs like Davy, You Upset My Home,
Had you know, David, boy, you upset my home.
and Right Back to My Arms stood out.
I'm home, little baby, right back to my arms.
But they didn't sell well. Touring was another challenge. Joe's band sometimes messed up performances, which annoyed him. Traveling was rough, especially in the South during that time. Joe's band, which included his white guitarist friend Johnny Williams, often faced racism. Finding places to stay or eat was difficult, and they had to ask for money from back home just to get to their next show. By 1957, King Records had lost interest in Joe, and his sales were poor. But Joe didn't give up. He moved to New Orleans and Baton Rouge, where he met pianist James Booker. Booker introduced him to Ace Records, where Joe started fresh. His first song with them, Cut It Out, came out. Joe was introduced to Islam by Norman Joe Tex, had a fascinating personal life, filled with changes in his career and beliefs. Let's take a quick look at some of the important moments that shaped him. Joe was introduced to Islam by Norman Thrasher, his road manager at the time. Thrasher, who used to work with Hank Ballard, shared his faith with Joe, and it made a big impact on him. The next year, Joe made some money with a KFC commercial, earning $10,000 and getting a Cadillac for both him and his wife at the time. That same year, he also became a racehorse owner with 3 horses under his name. By December 1967, Joe found himself in a sad situation. He was asked to be a pallbearer at the funeral of the famous singer Otis Redding. Tragically, Joe would do this again in June 1968, when Little Willie John passed away in prison. In the late 1960s, Joe became part of a music group called the Soul Clan, which included well-known artists like Solomon Burke and Ben E. King. Unfortunately, this group didn't last long, but they did come together again in 1981 for a short time.
That's how I feel.
Around this period in 1968, Joe officially converted to Islam and changed his name to Yusef Haziez, later calling himself Minister Joseph X. Arrington. At this point, he took a break from his music career to focus more on his faith and serve the spiritual leader, Elijah Muhammad. In 1972, Joe had a tough time when someone stole $7,000 worth of jewels and clothing from his hotel room in Detroit. Later that same year, his hit song I Gotcha left the charts, and he stepped back from performing. In 1973, he married Leah X. Miller in a Muslim ceremony. Joe even joined other Muslims at a rally in Atlanta in 1975, including Norman Thrasher and the Mighty Hannibal. Sadly, Elijah Muhammad passed away. With the approval of his son, Wallace Muhammad, Joe returned to the music world. He released his final album, He Who Is Without Funk Cast the First Stone, and then retired from full-time performing. Joe spent his later years on his ranch in Navasota, Texas, focusing on his faith. Even in retirement, Joe stayed active in his support of the Houston Oilers football team. He even wrote a song called Here Come Number 34, due to Earl Campbell, celebrating one of the team's star players.
All right, wake up, Astro City!
Joe's family also played a big role in his life. His nephews, Wyman and Neil Armstead, often drove him to concerts when he was performing near Baytown. Wyman shared a fun memory of how he used to drive Joe around before he even had a driver's license. Apparently, Joe loved writing songs while driving and talking to people in the back seat about his ideas. Joe made his last TV appearance with a group called the Soul Clan. This was part of a short revival of the group from the 1960s. When Joe appeared on TV, people noticed that he looked big and unwell. After this appearance, he decided to leave the spotlight and live quietly on his ranch in Navasota, Texas. Throughout much of his career, Tex maintained a reputation for sobriety, steering clear of alcohol and drugs. However, the final years of his life were marred by a descent into substance, a stark contrast to his earlier lifestyle. Despite this comeback, Tex faced mounting financial difficulties. According to his longtime producer, Buddy Killen, Tex was not adept at managing his finances, leading to substantial debt. These financial strains contributed to a period of depression and declining health. In an attempt to cope, Tex turned to drugs and alcohol during the last 4 years of his life, a period described by Killen as a marathon of self. This late life struggle with addiction was a dramatic departure from Tex's previously clean lifestyle. His health deteriorated rapidly. He appeared gaunt and unwell during his final performances. In early August 1982, Tex was found unconscious at the bottom of his swimming pool. While the circumstances remain unclear whether it was an accident or a attempt, he was revived and returned home. Shortly thereafter, on August 13, 1982, Tex suffered a fatal heart attack at his home in Navasota, Texas, just days after his 47th birthday. Joe Tex left behind his wife, 2 daughters, and 4 sons. His music and talent will always be remembered by those who enjoyed his work. At Joe's funeral, held in a wood-frame church in Navasota, Killen claims the mortician refused to bury Tex until someone came up with $5,000. Killen agreed to pay it, and the guy eventually put Joe in the ground. Towards the end of his time, despite all his troubles, Tex at least could still identify with what really mattered to him in life. He told writer Peter Gorelnik, "It's been nice here, man. A lot of ups and downs the way life is. But I've enjoyed this life. I was glad that I was able to come up out of creation and look all around and see a little bit. Grass and trees and cars, fish and steaks, potatoes, and I thank God for that. I'm thankful that He let me get up and walk around and take a look around here. 'Cause this is nice." Joe Tex was a black artist who made soul music but loved mixing in country sounds too. This wasn't easy back in the day. In the 1960s and 70s, music genres were divided by race. Country music was seen as white while soul and R&B were black. But Joe didn't let these rules stop him. He blended styles and made music that spoke to everyone. His boldness helped break racial and genre barriers, but it also made his journey tough. Joe didn't have the silky voice of Sam Cooke or the powerhouse style of Otis Redding, but he had something special, a way of delivering his songs that pulled you in. He could switch from talking straight to your heart in spoken words to soaring, emotional singing. His songs often had humor and deep messages about relationships and life. Critics praised him for being honest about the ups and downs between men and women. Joe's songs felt like little stories or sermons with a touch of country wisdom. Even though Joe Tex wasn't as famous as James Brown or Wilson Pickett, his impact was huge. He created hits that crossed genres like Hold What You've Got,
Hold on to what you got.
and inspired big stars like Johnny Cash and Etta James to cover his songs. He had 4 million selling singles and left his mark on soul, gospel, funk, and even rock. Joe Tex's ability to mix styles made him one of the most unique singers of his time. After Joe passed away in 1982, his legacy didn't get the attention it deserved. Fans and historians like Jason Martinko, who wrote Joe's biography, believe his story needs to be remembered. Martinko called Joe Tex the most overlooked singer and songwriter in American soul music history. Tex faced many struggles during his career. These challenges made it hard for him to stay popular during a time when music was changing fast. The 1970s was the disco era, and music tastes were shifting quickly. Even with a hit, staying at the top wasn't easy. People's tastes were changing, and the music scene was filled with new artists and sounds that made it hard to keep up. On top of the changes in music, Tex had a demanding job that made balancing family life tough. Like many artists, he had to tour a lot, performing in different cities and even countries. Touring meant being away from home for long stretches of time. It was hard for Tex to be with his family when he was constantly on the road. The music industry at that time had very busy schedules that didn't leave much room for rest or time at home. For someone with a family, this was a difficult balance to manage. Even though Tex had a big hit, it wasn't easy for him to get the respect he deserved in the music industry. He was nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 6 times, but he was never inducted. This was a big disappointment for Tex, especially because he had worked so hard for many years. Being nominated multiple times showed that people knew who he was and what he contributed to music, but the Hall of Fame never gave him the recognition he hoped for. This showed how difficult it can be to gain the respect of the music industry, even when you've worked hard and achieved success. Joe Tex really deserves to be honored more. Known as one of the fathers of Southern soul, Joe Tex released some of the first soul recordings that helped shape the genre. He made music that made people feel good, dance, and think. In the 1960s, Joe Tex's style stood out, mixing soulful melodies with catchy rhythms. Despite his huge talent, he wasn't always given the credit he deserved. Many people remember other artists from that time, but Joe Tex's music is still loved by those who know it. His songs were more than just hits. They told stories, gave advice, and made you feel something deep inside. One of his most popular songs is I Gotcha, but there are so many great tracks from him. Now I want to ask you, what is your favorite song from Joe Tex? Let's celebrate his music together and keep his legacy alive, because he truly helped build soul music into what it is today.